Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Nizik from the New York Metro ACM chapter and New York Institute of Technology. And today I'm going to be presenting to you a new program that we've opened up called Networking and Educational Webinar Series, or NEWS, or our news program. And it's designed to give short lectures and demonstrations of technologies that are in high demand in industry, that are also kind of neat little technologies we should know about for our own companies and our own jobs, and just things that are out there may not have known how much they do, but also to kind of give any students attending as well an idea of career paths and things like that as well. So today we're talking about creating web applications with C# and ASP.NET. C# is a programming language that's in the C family of languages. Just like C, C++, Java, JavaScript, very similar syntax. It's just a little bit, different and a little bit more powerful in some areas as far as what it can do. And it's focused on the Windows platform. So even though there's a lot of browser-based applications that we do, which we're going to focus on today, that run on everything, there's a lot of local applications that are designed that run on Windows platforms specifically. And ASP.NET is the ASP.NET framework, which is what they call the ASP.NET platform now. It started as the framework, but basically the framework allows us to connect and import in all these different libraries and tools that when we code, we're able to use those tools to basically do everything from embedded web windows and embedded content and things like that in our web pages. So it makes it really easy and quick to design pretty nice things. Before we start, just want to give a thank you to all of our members, and especially our institutional members, which are Mindshift, Henry Schein, Custom Computer Specialist, and of course, New York Institute of Technology, St. John's University, Adelphi University, Hofstra University, and Suffolk Community College, and all of our individual members, our student members, our longtime members, and our new members, especially welcome. This is a new series we're doing, and we hope you enjoy it. So let's get going. This can be an informal session. We can do questions if you want to post them in the chat. Juby, I might ask you to read those to me as they pop up if I'm getting kind of too deep with something. Or we can wait till the end and answer those questions as well. But feel free to chime in and ask something if I'm demoing something and you want to go through it. Sure. Okay, so as we talked about in the invite, we're going to ask some questions today and try to answer them, like how do web applications differ from desktop applications? How do I create an application that works on all platforms, Windows, the Apple operating system, the Apple OS, Linux operating systems? How do I create those apps so that we only need a browser to operate them? How do I connect the new application that I just created? That's a presentation layer, but how do I connect it to a server, a database server, so I can look at real live data from another system, possibly from my enterprise system? How do I publish my new application globally? How do I make this change on this platform and on this project one time in one area? And how does it get to 11 billion machines at the same time? And that's what we're going to talk about today. And also, how does C#, the language, differ from JavaScript, HTML, or HTML5? So throughout the presentation, we're going to hit on these, and we're going to talk about them. And most of it you're going to see, which will be fun on that. So on the session agenda, the way we'll structure this is just very, very kind of briefly in overviews, talk about some career opportunities for people that are looking at this as a career, the background of the language, the tier development, 1, 2, and 3 tier applications, why they're different. Talk about Visual Studio, which is the actual IDE, or the integrated development environment we use to develop applications. Visual Studio is a Microsoft product that is specifically designed. It's actually the #1 IDE by market share in the world today. So it's something you should know about anyway, regardless of C# projects or not. And then we're going to actually do a demo. We're going to create projects. We're going to look at current project we're working on today. So it makes a little more sense as far as how you would use it to develop these web-based projects. And we're going to talk about the frameworks, creating web forms, coding, the code behind that we call it. How do you make a web page behave like a program that's running on your local computer, but really it's hosted? We're going to talk about configuring a web server so that it can host one of these applications, and then publishing your project. Once we actually create a project and we run it, how do we publish it from our local machine, our local desktop, a local laptop? How do we publish it with just a click of a button? Essentially, a couple of configurations, but a click of a button, and literally 11 billion devices have access to it, right? How do we do that? And of course, accessing and running your project. So we'll go over all that today. So for starters, especially for the students, but also for the transitional workers or anybody watching this at a later date who's just thinking about career changes, C# as a developer, it's a career path in itself. You don't need to know everything about everything to be a really good C# developer. And as you can tell, I mean, this is a dated snapshot I took that I use from time to time, but I mean, 28,000 jobs available, wonderful kind of, lifestyle change for a lot of people, kind of salary. And, these senior level jobs, you notice the word senior, that doesn't mean 20 years, it's 3 to 5 years. People are looking for somebody who can really work on their own and build new applications. And they call them full stack developers, people that can design the database and the code and the application. But overall, we're not talking about 10, 20-year, professionals, 3 to 5 years. If you have that kind of experience and can do that type of level of quality of work, you'll qualify. So it's something to really consider. As far as the language goes, we look at the top languages, JavaScript, Python, Java, C++, and C, and PHP. C#'s pretty far down the list. The reasoning it is not because there's not a ton of developers, as you saw, or a ton of usage. It's the fact that it's a proprietary language. It's a Microsoft-based language. So when you're using it, if a company is a startup company and they want to use a certain language, they want to kind of make sure that there's no issues with it when they want to sell the company or raise money or things like that. The proprietary language, kind of maybe gets in the way that way. But overall, when you're using this to develop applications internally to streamline your operations, or there's a lot of websites that are out there that are very popular that do use it, and do have thousands of users, that use it. So it's one of those things that are out there. It's very similar to C, C++, and Java in the structure of it, as far as the way we design classes and methods, and the way we work with everything from conditionals to variables. It's extremely similar, so it's easy to learn for somebody who already is a programmer and already is programming in a C family of languages. Okay. And finally, we just discuss tiers. So when you make a program and the program, say, runs on a cell phone or on a tablet only, it's connecting to the internet to get some updates and things like that, but really it's running locally. It's a one-tier application. The database layer, the presentation layer, and the application layer are all kind of on one system. And they don't really kind of branch out globally. When we talk about two-tier applications, it's client server, where the program itself runs on the machine, and then it's attaching to a database remotely. That's a two-tier application. But when we talk about three-tier, which is really what we're talking about today, building web applications, we're basically building applications that are the data layer, the application layer, and the presentation layer. Every single thing runs on one layer, one tier. So, and that tier you can kind of convert over practically to a server. So a Windows server or a Linux server, everything running on that one server is accessible by the world. So the database, the presentation layer on what looks and what shows to the user, and also the application layer, the coding behind the interface, all runs in the same platform, which allows you to access it just from a browser from anywhere. And that's what we're talking about today. All right, so now we'll get back to our just agenda. We're going to get into creating projects now and talking about some coding snippets and how we actually build these projects and how they kind of work together. All right, now we're going to get into the C# and ASP.NET demonstration. Okay, any questions so far? No? Okay. Okay, so the first thing we'll discuss is that everything that we're going to see next is Visual Studio Community Edition. The Visual Studio Community Edition is the IDE that is the same IDE that's run on a commercial platform versus a local platform. So if you learn it, you're not going to see any differences when you go into the enterprise and work as a programmer. So those these differences in the development tool that we're going to see today versus the one that you would use in industry are the same. So Visual Studio Community is the version you would download. It's free. Main reason I'm telling you, the database we're going to use today is called SQL Server Express. Now, SQL Server is very expensive to run as a platform, but SQL Server Express is the same tool in industry that you would get privately, and as a developer. And once you learn it, you can operate the enterprise version just like you operate the SQL version, the Express version, and it's free. So feel free to download these and get going. And after a session like this, I always say the one thing stopping you from doing something like this for your own business or for your own career is you, right? There's no reason, there's no financial boundaries or anything like that. Okay, so let's talk before we go into the application piece of this. Let's talk about an actual program, right? This is a program that we're currently building. And it's a neat way to talk about kind of the issues that you run into and how you would kind of want this thing to behave. So this is a course assessment report we're building that's online. And the reason that we're doing that is to kind of streamline all of our data and make it available for everybody's, from their phone, from their tablet, from their, no more shared spreadsheets or anything like that we have to kind of work with. Building this into an app that people can use is, creating something that's a solution to a problem. And all you need is a browser to do these things. And when you kind of want to have that program, that website behave like a program that you would actually have on your desktop, you have to have certain tools. You have to have kind of like hyperlinks and buttons and drop downs, right? We want to make something behave. We want to make something behave like a program, but it's a website, right? So we're used to HTML and we're used to making things look a certain way using HTML, but how do we make something behave like a program? How do we have buttons, we have clicks, we're making something look like that. That's going to run on every platform from any computer in the world, from any device in the world, as long as they have a browser, which is, you have to, right? How do we do that, right? And how do we get it to show real-time data? How do we get this web page that's available to 11 billion devices to actually show data from a local database that we're controlling, right? How's that all possible? That's what today's about, right? That's what we're going to do next. So basically, I want to use this program under development, and I want to show you some of the things specifically in the FCAR Manager program that we're designing, where we can actually go and bring up things, and we can have buttons that do certain things, and we can go to tasks, and we have data showing up, right? How does that all work in C# and in Visual Studio? And that's the next step. Okay, so let's look a little bit about Visual Studio for a second. Visual Studio is just a program, just like anything else. Visual Studio is a program you would install on your workstation, download it, install it. I have an older version here, but I think this 2019 is a new version that's out there. And just like every other program, we have, file, edit, view, project, just like everything else, we have menus. There's no magic in the fact that this is just one more program for you to use. In this case, though, it allows us to build web applications that we can publish for the world to see, right? And it doesn't have to be the whole world. You can limit it to who sees it. But on the same note, you're making changes as a lifelong software guy for me, making changes years ago where you had to deliver that change to every computer in the industry and in the organization, which could have been thousands. And if only one has an old version, you still have the bug, right? I mean, that it's hard to express that to today's developers because they're always building in this 3-tier environment and building these web apps. But that was the frustration that we would go through. This is pure beauty, in my opinion, that we can build these things, make all the changes once, test them, release them, and now everybody has those changes, right? Really, really wonderful time to be a developer. So you'll see things like project and build. These are where our compiling features are. This is where our debug features are. So if you're used to anything like you're working with Java and you work with NetBeans, or you work with BlueJ or any of the IDEs for Java, and you compile, same type of thing, except here we're just doing it more in a Windows kind of format. The other thing with C# is that Microsoft allows you to work as a team. So the way C# works is that when you're building an actual page that's going to show up somewhere, in this case, we're going to work primarily with the FCAR manager as the page. You'll start to see different pages open. So one is the ASPX page, which is the presentation layer. It's the actual look and feel of the page, right? And then you have the C# page, which is going to be the actual C# code behind it, but they're different files. And the reason you have different files is that you can have different people with different skill sets, with different jobs, with different responsibilities, work on the same project together. All right. So this team concept, agile, right? Agile we know is SDLC with right, SDLC on steroids, because now we have working with the customer. We have a project flow like SDLC, but we have working with the customer, embracing change, working with other programmers, right? Sharing ideas, sharing content, not being the sole programmer. This allows today's developers from school onward to work in the agile development. And that's why it's also the #1 IDE, because you don't have to build just C# programs. You could build any application in this tool. All right. So we now know that, you're basically building any kind of file, in this case, using this. Now we're going to build a web application today, but be aware that with Visual Studio, when you make a new project, that project can be a Windows desktop application. It could be a console application. With Visual Studio and C#, you could build any type of application that you want, and the coding stays the same. The tools stay the same, which I'm going to show you the toolbox in a second. So once you do learn Visual Studio, and once you do learn C#, you're not limited to the type of application you create. You can build all types of applications for all different types of purposes, and you're only really learning one method, right? But you're doing all of that. And one thing I'll point out is you can see in Visual Studio, you can build Python applications, you can build Android apps, you could build Apple Watch apps, right? You could build iOS apps. So even though it's a Microsoft product, and even though we're building a web page now using a Microsoft platform, but really we're going to release it to any browser, any phone, tablet, or laptop or desktop browser, it'll work on all of them on any operating system, right? That's what we're doing today. But we can also build these native apps in Visual Studio, right? So it's not just about C#, it's not just about a web app, which is today's focus. Visual Studio will do all of these features for you in one spot, okay? And you don't have to kind of learn 6, 7, 8 different platforms to do that development, okay? So that's a little summary on Visual Studio for that piece of it. Okay, so let's look at this particular page so we can get an idea of what's actually happening here, right? The first thing is that, well, we're looking at what would normally be the FCAR manager page, right? This is the FCAR manager.aspx page up here. And we're looking at this here, and this is what it looks like. But when we look at it in Visual Studio, it looks very different. Why? Because we build the page to only show what we wanted to based on different controls, right? We activate as visible or not visible using C# code to activate these different controls. This panel we make visible, this panel we make visible or not, right? And we have that. And what you'll see is that in each one of these kind of visual kind of layouts that we also have controls. We have fields that accept text. We can control what text goes in and out of there. We can control, we have drop downs. We have links that are actually buttons. They look like links, like hyperlinks to get people used to it, but they're really buttons with code behind them. And where do we get this? How do we choose these? How do we make our website look like a program, right? For those of you who have developed before in other types of applications, we make windows, pop up, and we have an X and a minimize and a maximize, and we have like drop downs and tabs. How do we do that in a web page? That's the issue. That's what ASP.NET and that's what Visual Studio and that's what C# allow you to do, is to make a web page look and feel and behave just like a program you would make running on a 2-tier or a client server application, right? And the way we do that, if you look over here, this is a Solution Explorer, but we have a toolbox. The toolbox is really what Visual Studio, makes it really, really unique. All these different tools, right? Everything from ad rotators to buttons to calendars to drop-down lists to checkboxes. Every single one of these tools, no matter what type of application you're using, remains the same. The radio button, the drop-down, the multiple select lists, whether you're building an Apple app or an Android app, or these tools are always available for you to use. So once you get used to them, once you realize I'm going to put a calendar app here, and then I'm going to put a button here, and then I'm going to do this, you would get the workflow in your head of how you want this to behave. You can design off of these tools. So the toolbox is what allows you to drag and drop some of these pieces over here. Okay. Now, when we're dealing with, code that we know that, well, when we click on this dropdown, it's dropping that data. Well, where does that data come from? In Visual Studio, once you drop in one of these items, that item has the choice to connect to different data sources, right? Now, one of the amazing things, been around for years, but the concept of open database connectivity and native controlling drivers to connect to databases and things like that. One of the amazing things still to me is that from a development tool like this, we can choose to connect to any data source that we want in the same application. So we can have a form with two dropdowns, and one dropdown attaches to the SQL database that has names in it, and one dropdown can attach to the Oracle database that has addresses in it, right? It's just an amazing thing to me to say there's one web page that's available to 11 billion people, 11 billion devices, or 22 billion now, I think is what we're moving towards on the internet now, connected devices. But each one of those devices can have access to this one single page with that accesses two separate enterprise databases, right? And we'll do some demos on that, on how that connects. But just know that each one of these controls in Visual Studio, in C#, in ASP.NET, in this tool set we're talking about today, each one has its ability to connect to a data set so that it populates the way you want it to. Now, the other piece is that when you go to your tools, notice that you still have all your traditional HTML tools. So you can make your C# application behave just like an HTML application. So you don't lose any of that functionality, but you do gain a lot of functionality that allows you to deal with all kinds of different things. One of them that's very important is the fact that you have a data section. And when you're dealing with a data section, you're allowed to basically take your form that you're creating and input data controls, right? We might want to put a chart to display visual graphical data of, right, a SQL table, right? Even summary data, a list of data, a pager meeting to go from one page to another. Each record is a new page, right? We have grid views that show everything in a grid, right? So we have all these different data controls that we can drag and drop into the system. All right, so let's take a look at kind of like what this looks like behind the scenes, right? We're looking at a visual design right now, and that's fine. But really what we're looking at is we're looking at source code. We're looking at ASP or active server page code. That particular code is very similar to HTML, very similar. However, since it's running on a server that reads and controls active server code, it behaves, right? You can write code that behaves a certain way, that adjusts based on resolution, that adjusts based on operating system, right? You can use ASP code to basically read what operating system is attaching to your website and then change based on that operating system. You look at versions of operating systems, say, this new change I made won't run on anything that's iOS versions or later. That's the changes. One of the questions we had for today is the difference between HTML, HTML5, and C#. Is that with C# and ASP.NET, you can do all these things and read all these things, and you can even interact with the local workstation. So even though the code at the server level is operating at the server level at some hosted site somewhere in the world, it can still access local resources and local information from your computer, from your connecting device, right? Which makes it really neat and really powerful to work with. So when you see I guess my long-winded point is that when you see a design and you see a dropdown, know that dropdown simply exists because we have it coded in our ASP code. We're telling it what the name is. We're telling it what type of value of data it is. We're telling it the size. These are all the actual settings for each one. Now, can you code this straight out? And sure, but you got to be really good. And I'm not that good. So what I do is when I click on one of these controls, the actual properties of that control show up also visibly. So everything that you saw in the ASP code for that dropdown, you could configure through the tools as well. Could you add things in? Of course. But like I tell my students, if you try to hand code everything, you'll burn out. You won't do an 8-hour day at the office. You'll do a 2-hour day and have a headache. So part of agile development is using tools, right? It's part of the right work with the customer, embrace change, deliver products in increments, and use tools, right? So use those tools to manage your productivity. That's the agile environment that companies are looking for you to be part of. Okay, so understand that whatever we're seeing visually is in this kind of like simulated browser setting, but really it's behind the scenes is all the actual ASP code that we see. Okay, now sometimes what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to collect information from our fields and our controls that we're putting in. However, sometimes we want a button to do something magical, right? Sometimes it's great to work with HTML type, web type, controls, and we're very familiar with that. But sometimes we need to do something with that data we collect, right? If we decide to do some sort of mathematical problem with the area under a curve or something like that, and we collected the information from the fields on the web page, the web page isn't going to calculate that, right? That's not going to do that level of work. What we have to do is have some sort of programming language behind, right? The code behind, that's why we call it code behind, the code behind the controls. And that's why we have in our Solution Explorer, that's why we have a page for the design, which is what you're looking at here. And we have a page for the code. It gives us this kind of beautiful world that we can have designers work on the look and feel of things and make it all, really professional and pretty and interactive. And then we can have coders that may not have the same skill sets, but can make all the difference in the world as far as capturing the data from the web page and then calculating it in certain ways, right? And doing certain things with it. And what we do is when we look at a page and we actually go to the control of that page, all of a sudden we're now in this world that we're familiar with, right? We're in this coding world. This is C#. What you saw before was ASP.NET and ASP code. This is C#. This is the C family of languages. So the wonderful thing about this type of design is that you have the ASPX page for designing, and as long as they name the controls a certain way, the programmer can work, alone, or with a group of programmers, as long as they know what the names of the controls are, do all the coding. And then when the two pages merge together, I'm not saying there won't be any configuration or testing or troubleshooting, but essentially you can have these two groups go off and work and come back together and say, wow, this beautiful looking web page is now interacting with the SQL database in a very, very complex manner with complex algorithms that have nothing to do with the look and feel of the page, right? And the two worlds merge together very nicely in this IDE, this Visual Studio IDE environment. So if you look at behind, as far as the C# goes, the way we create methods inside of a class, very similar. All we're doing in this particular one is we're actually just running another method. And if we go to that save method function, let's see if we can get down there. What that button, when we click it, it's saying run the save data method. But when we look at it, we're setting string variables, right? We're giving them names, we're capturing the text from the field. There's a field name called send data for semester data, but whatever text is in it, we're setting it to a variable. So if you've done any coding in the past before, this is going to look very familiar to you because you're like, wow, this is C#, a totally different language, but it's extremely similar. On top of that, what we were able to do, because we've included in this particular class the ability to connect to a SQL Server, I'll show you how we do that in a second. But because we've done that, we can actually create a SQL statement embedded into our code that's part of our native C# code as part of this method. So we can collect all the data very easily, and then we can run the SQL code, and then we can make those changes to the SQL database. Now, I didn't want this seminar to be about SQL database. I think we're going to have another one of those as part of the news session because there's so much to it. But I do want to show you that in SQL Server, which is its own It's not a development environment. It's not coding or anything like that. But what you have is when you look at the actual SQL database and you look at the actual tables and things like that in the SQL database, our FCAR database, when we look at this, these particular fields are being populated by the ASP web page, right? So it's a very, very, very exciting, for some of us, clearly to me, but it's a very exciting time for development because you're working in this web-based environment where you have coding access through just your code to attach to an Oracle database, a SQL database, a MySQL database, an Access database, right? And it's not, you don't have to write separate projects for that. You can have one project, one web page, but the data control on that web page can attach to one data source. Another one can attach to another data source. So, so this concept of attaching to these databases and making these changes, through a web-based app that's available to everybody is just, it gets you to really think about how powerful this is and how world-changing this could be depending on what you build, what type of app you build. All right. So this is the C# environment. Let me go back up here for a second and show you some of the pieces that you wind up having to integrate with this. But one of the things we do whenever we work with, C family, we have abstraction. We have libraries that do amazing things, but we don't really work with those libraries. There's too much code. So we abstract it and we basically use something called information hiding. We basically say, all right, we're going to using the system class, right? So that we could do certain things with the operating system. We're going to use the data.SQL client class. So all the things inside of there we can use to attach to a SQL database. Now, if Oracle had its own class, we would use system.oracle.web or something, whatever that's called. But as long as we use these classes right up here with just a one line of code in C#, we can use anything that class does, right? If that class runs SQL statements, great. If that class does some sort of data, DDL, data definition language components, great. But that concept of being able to just import in basically. So in Python, we use import. In Java, we use import. In C++, we use include. C# uses using. All the same principles. So it's very easy to learn from one to the other. And just to give you an example, so as long as we have the data client class included, and as long as we establish that we are making a new connection, okay, this default connection we have configured in something, I won't show that for this one for security reasons, but this particular connection, this default connection attaches to the SQL database, right? We can have another connection called database 2, database 3, database 4. As long as these connection strings exist, anytime we create a new application, a new form, anything like that, it's all we're doing is referencing it. We're just kind of attaching to it through that. We don't have to do any additional coding. Okay, so everything else, loops, here's a conditional right here, looping through things, setting, we do request query strings. We actually can send from one page to another. We can send data from the form, from the fields on one page to another page, so it reads them in. Here, we're requesting information from the prior page, and we're doing that. So the C# code is very, very, very clinical at the coding level, and you can do amazing things. You can even do things with importing, with using C#, using something so-called the IO class. You have access to all the IO devices on a person's machine. So you could basically say, here's a web app, and we're going to use the camera and the file system, and we're going to save a file to their documents folder, and we're going to, I mean, it makes it really interactive. So that concept of developing in this and giving you so much power with just the inclusion of certain libraries is very, very powerful. So so I thought we would do is take this one page and see, all right, well, we've got we've got a visual view, we've got an ASP view, we've got a C# view. How does it all work together? But we don't want to load it yet. What if there's a bug? What if there's an issue? So what we do is we go to build, right? We go to the build feature and we build the solution first, and we make sure there's no bugs, right? And if we get it succeeded, then we know it's not going to crash. And then what we do is we choose our environment. right? We can choose what web browser we want to see this in. We can choose what emulator we want to see this in. I'm going to test in Chrome because it's my default, but we can choose an iPhone emulator, right? Right from that dropdown, we can choose an Android emulator. We can actually see what this is going to look like on an Android phone. We can see what it's going to look like on an iPhone. So when you're developing and you're testing, instead of having all these devices lying around, be like, try it on here, try it on here. You can test in the environment as long as you have the utility. So here it's coming up. It's asking us for, right? But I'm not live right now. I'm not actually, this is how it's going to behave and this is what it's going to look like, but I'm not live. When I go to the website that I showed you before, this is live, but I've already published that, which we'll talk about before we close today. That's okay, but we have an ability to debug, compile and debug, and we can also view it in a browser before we ever release it, right? Because when we release it, it really truly is out there, right? When we do this, if we haven't really tested it in a real environment yet, it really truly is out there. And if you've got thousands of users that may be paying you, a subscription fee or something, and they get a notification that there's an update, they're going to go in and try it. And if there is a bug issue, it's very sensitive. So the plus is making these changes locally that go out, that you don't have to update machines. The downside is that when you make a change and there's an error, which we've all done, that error is getting out to millions of people at the same time, right? So it's a double-edged sword. So let's just take a look real quick of what this looks like when we kind of create something new. So we go to project, we're going to add a new item. That item can be one of many, many different types of items, right? We can create a simple web form with a master page where we have like a title and a page, so it looks more like a program, which is what I use a lot. We can choose APIs, we can choose JavaScript files, we can create really so many different types of files. AngularJS, if you like JavaScript, you can create those files, and they all become part of the same project. So you can create a web form, a JavaScript file, and a JSON file, all in the same project using the same, but you don't have to go out and save and then add it to a project. It's all done in the same project. But if I just choose my web forms with master page right now, and I'm going to call this ACM Metro, right, .aspx, and I add that, and it's going to ask me for my master page. I'm going to do the site master page. And now it comes up with some default ASPX ASP code. And when I go to design, it's going to make sure it has my title bar that I've defaulted to the title bar, but it's also got a main content section in here, right? So what we can do is, we can come and we can basically say, all right, let's put let's go to our toolbox and let's drop bear with me one second. Let's drop a panel. Now this panel, what we can do, if you're familiar with CSS, cascading style sheets, it's a way to have a single file that identifies all the fonts and everything you want to use, so you don't have to kind of do it every time. So what I can do is I can see this is panel 1, and what you can do is you can go to panel 1 and choose the cascading style sheet, right? And what we would do is we would make sure that there's a style sheet that we want to choose from. So if I go to the source of this particular page, and I'm going to come inside this panel here, right here, and I'm just going to go to my Solution Explorer, and I'm going to go down to Style Sheet, and I am going to drop in Style Sheet 1, and I'm going to drop in Style Sheet 2. Okay, and now when I go to my design, and I go back to I keep moving my video screen too, so bear with me on that. Now when I go to my design, select my panel, now what we have is we have a CSS class, and if we choose this rounded, we have this kind of option in here that we choose this rounded container 2. It changes that format, so it comes up with the shadows and the big fonts and I could put anything in panel 1 now, but I don't have to change any of the fonts, any of the sizes, any of the colors. I just choose the CSS item in that style sheet, and everything, right? Let's say I have an artist, a designer design a special color blue, right? And the special color is very unique to, I don't ever have to reconfigure that per page. We just take the page, choose the CSS item from the CSS script, from the style sheet, and that's it. Everything we want that to look like is going to be there. So now in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to center this. And what I could do is I could import an image just using some controls again. If I go back to my toolbox, I could import something like an image button here. Now notice there's an image, but there's an image button, okay? And in that image button, it's going to behave like a button, not just an image like an HTML image, which has nothing behind it, maybe a hyperlink. But in an HTML document, I can't make that hyperlink do anything that attaches to a database, makes changes as mathematical calculations. I can't do that because it's a hyperlink. It just the browser lets a hyperlink go to another page. That's it. But with a button, with an image button, it could be an image just like a hyperlink, but behind it is C# code, right? So you want to be careful you want to be cognizant that you have more power in doing that, right? So what we can do is we can select this particular image button, and we can select the actual URL that we want to be part of that. So we're going to click the URL, and we're going to put, let's choose, I believe we have like some kind of an Earth image or something like that, right? So let's choose this kind of Earth image. Just having fun here, so bear with me. We're going to basically choose this Earth image, and when we click on this Earth image, we want something to happen, right? So let's save this so we don't kind of lose any work here. And basically, when we want to click on this, we want something to happen. Well, if we click on it and we use a hyperlink, it could take us to another page. But what we could do is we could actually code behind it and make it do something really fancy, like do something before it goes to the page, something after it goes to the page. And basically what we do is we double click on that. And now we go into, right? Now we go into the source code. So it automatically created a C# method inside of the partial class ACM Metro called image button 1_click. Just did that for us by double clicking on it. And now what we can do is we can do something like response.redirect, and we can just basically send it to, let's see, http:// www.google.com, right? So as you can tell, it starts popping up little red things and gives us the errors. It tells us very easily if I forget a semicolon, it doesn't just give me a bug, but it will kind of tell me what's right, tells me what it is. So it makes it very easy to find the compilation errors. And now when I save this and I load it up, what we should get, is a web page, right? ACM Metro.ASPX that actually has the title bar in it, because we use like a parent, right? We use like the main window plus the sub window. This is the new form. It's got all the CSS settings, right? The color of the border, the width of the border, the rounded corners, right? I didn't do any of that. I just assigned the CSS page, the style sheets, and I assigned that particular rounded corner section. Everything else in that section was set already, so it took that automatically. And now with the, right, as I hover over this, I get the link, I get the finger, and it takes me to Google, but it didn't load up that page. But that's okay. I don't know why I didn't do that, but I might have typed in the link wrong. But as I put in this image, as I move over it, that's going to be performing whatever it is in the class that I put behind that, okay, in the method I put behind that. Now, if I wanted to use the same page, and now below this button, I wanted to have some sort of access to a data source, okay? Now what we do is we come down here to the data section, and we say, let's put in a grid view. Like, let's look at a grid of values, and maybe we want to even interact with those values and change them or update them or delete them or whatever. And what we do is we drag over a grid view, okay? we're going to basically set this grid view up to connect to a data source. And we're going to go to a new data source. We're going to create a new data source. We're going to call it ACM Metro source, right? And ACM Metro data. Okay, we have to create a new different name. And we're going to create, we're going to use our default connection, which connects us to our current SQL Server. And then what we're going to do is we're simply going to choose from a table. Maybe you want to choose from something called Go commands or whatever it might be. Let's put in something called grade distribution, right? And we want to see something called A's, B's, and C's, okay? And we can select it where only, right, only, like a where clause for a SQL, where only this equals that. We can order it by ascending or descending, so all the A's in ascending order. We can even go to advanced and say that we want to basically include this primary key GDID. As long as we include that primary key, we can go to advanced, and we can let, right from the grid, we can let people edit and delete and update right from the grid. Now, what we do is we test the query and we see, okay, yeah, there's our A's, our B's, and our C's, and there's the unique ID for that one. So that's what we asked to see. And now it's actually attaching, right? This web page, which is a different product and different program than the SQL Server, it's attaching to the SQL Server and this particular table, right? And it's letting us edit it based on permissions and all that. So now what we do is we finish that. And what we do is we tell that table, all right, let's enable paging so there's not just thousands of items. Let's go like first 5, first 6, first 10, or whatever. We can enable sorting, we can enable editing, we can enable deleting, we can enable selecting, all right? And we can also go and change the format really easy. We could basically make it look colorful or, you know, simple or classic or whatever it might be. I think I like professional a lot of the times. It's like this offset blue. And if I apply that, I now have this really nice data source and database that's sitting in my table, inside my panel. Now, if I come down here and I increase this panel a little bit so it's fully inside the panel, what we should do is if I can select this, if I center this and then I hit this button, what we should see now is when we look at this particular page, it's not just going to show us the web page anymore with the link. It's going to show us the web page, right, with the data. So now we have this ABC column with the numbers, and we can go from page to page to page, right? Page 1, page 2, page 3. We can also sort based on the column. Let me maximize this so we can get a little bit more of a, we can sort on the column. We can sort ascending or descending. We can even come in here and say edit. There's not really 0 A's there, there's 4 A's, and we can update. Okay, and when we update that, now the actual now that particular item now has 4 A's in it versus 0 A's. Okay, so we can delete, we can select, we can once you select, you can do in the code, you can do something with that particular row. That's what select does. So in a very, very short period of time, we've created a new page with an image that links to somewhere else and could even do some other things with the code. We've even created a database access portal that, you know, that's going to access real data on a real SQL server somewhere hosted, so that if somebody from inside that organization changes data on the database, purely rawly on the database, it's going to reflect in anybody who accesses this page, right? So it's really, really powerful when you try to start to think about, wow, what does this mean for me as an organization if I could have applications that are centralized, that I can start providing services to my customers. As a student, if you're looking for career-wise, if I learn this, this is a career path just in one direction. Okay, and what I'm going to finalize with, because we are running out of time, is that once you design these things, you have to publish them to some source. And what I mean by that is you're running on a local machine at this point. You're running on a single machine that is your development machine. It might be very powerful, but people aren't connecting from all over the world to that machine. They're connecting to a hosted server. So what I'm saying is that once you develop this particular application, you have to basically publish it, right? So you have to publish this to a certain location. And we won't do this today because, again, this is kind of a product we're working on. But what you'll see is that you're looking at publishing information from a project to a certain location, right? And you can basically say, all right, let's look at what we're going to publish this to. Let's publish it to an Azure, hosted website. Let's publish it to your own GoDaddy site. All you need is an IP address, a username, a password, and a folder or subfolder that you're keeping it in. And from this application, right from here, once you configure that once, you simply say, all right, I think we're ready to go. Let's right click, let's publish our changes, and then publish. And when you click publish, boom, 20 billion devices have access to your changes. They might have to hit refresh, but on the same note, it's a heck of a lot better than rolling this out as separate executables and things like that. So what I wanted to do just real quick to finish up some of this is to go back to our presentation and just to let me go back up here to the beginning. Right, how do web applications differ from desktop applications? Desktop applications run on your local desktop. Web apps are global. Okay. How do you create a web application that works on all platforms? You just did, right? That web application that we just created will work on any operating system as long as there's a browser. There's nothing specific to what we did because it's running on a server in the cloud, and everything it needs in a 3-tier environment is in the cloud. Everything else that it needs to run is just a browser on the phone, tablet, laptop, desktop application. How do I connect my new application to SQL Server? You saw it, right? We actually went and created a new data source. We chose the default connection, and the connection string that gets created from Visual Studio is what connects that. How do I publish? We just saw that. We just saw there's a configuration you have to do to your particular web server, right? The IP address, the username, password, and so forth. But essentially, it's just about publishing. And finally, how does C# differ from JavaScript, HTML, HTML5? What we saw today was that there is a unique language for C# that's very proprietary and very specific, but has such similarities to the C family of languages that's easy to learn. But the ASP.NET framework is the difference. The ASP.NET framework, which allows you to do the calendars and the dropdowns and the radio buttons and every single thing that you can interact with from a web page, from an ASP.NET web page, that's what makes it different, right? JavaScript, HTML, HTML5 are wonderful, and they have their own features and abilities. But the ASP.NET framework, every time they add something new to the framework that allows you to do something else, C# has access to that framework, which means that you can embed C# code using that new feature in the new release of the framework to do that job. Okay, and that's the primary difference between them. Okay. And what I will do at this point is I just want to remind people that this is part of a news, the new news educational program we're putting out from New York Metro ACM. But as we do these, we are recording them, and we're going to make some videos that we're going to post on our YouTube channel that we just launched, but doesn't really have much content yet. But you can get to that from our website, and you go to the social media tab. And you can get to that from there. Okay. And with that, I'm going to finish up. I'm going to say thank you, and I'm going to open up for any questions from the audience.
Mike, it's Doug Munch. I have a, excuse me, just a quickie question. Publishing your app to a Linux server, what does the Linux server need to run to be able to process your code?
So if the Linux server is running Apache, you can publish the certain pieces of this site to it, but anything that is based on the ASP.NET framework is going to have to use IIS. So the IIS web server, that's the Microsoft web server, is going to host most of this stuff.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions for anybody?
Yeah, I had a question. Very nice presentation.
Oh, thank you.
You had a list of the top 10 programming languages. What is the date and source of that listing?
I
mean,
probably
Is
grabbed
it
it.
arbitrary or is it researched or,
Probably got it from somewhere on the web. I don't have it listed here, though.
yeah, all right,
But
okay.
you can see some of the dates they have here as far as the languages go.
Yeah, not that, I don't mean the dates, I meant the top programming.
Yeah, I don't, it's probably from, yeah, I don't have the answer. I
All
don't,
right, okay.
but it was something where it was,
I got it, yeah, okay. I
Alright.
wasn't sure if it was researched or what. Okay, thanks. It's very interesting what you're doing with the C# and ASP. Very good.
yeah, no, not a problem. Thank you. It's, we use it for, in my lab, we use it a lot for our prototypes, because once you design one asset, we have our Ursula robotics project and other stuff. Once you design it for that one asset, it's pretty easy to move it over, the same asset that you built, to move it over into another, for another purpose. We can repurpose the asset. So very powerful that way.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. It was really good for someone who is just looking at any kind of web programming. It's not in my line of work. It was interesting to see how you can do the plugin of the components and construct the page.
Yeah, it's very incredibly popular for internal solutions. So like if a company is an insurance company and they already have a web page, and it's all internal solutions to streamline workflow, right? They're working off of, say, SAP, or they're working off of an Oracle-based database for something else. To design these applications that kind of like solve the solution for the accounting department, for the finance department, for warehousing, right? Designing custom apps that just solve, tons of efficiency issues. It's like an incredible platform to do that very quickly.
Yep. Great.
All right. Well, as always, it was a pleasure to be able to do this for New York Metro ACM. Happy to be part of the group, and thank you, everybody. And I will let you know when this comes out on YouTube.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. It was great.